Hello, Internet. It is time for. I'm going to call this a Wednesday's Serial Op Ed. So, first off, to round off a few things, I want to talk about Battle of the Atom as an entirety with someone else some other time, because that's a whole nother thing. And I mean, to talk about this week's comics, there's like 2 Ninja Turtles comics this week, both awesome. Go read Ninja Turtles. I don't know how many times I have to say. This is like my favorite incarnation of all things Turtles, as it's really just like the ultimization of everything. I picked up the Damien comic, Bad Chat Realm. Saga was great. I don't really have anything new to say for that as a video. But first, before I get further, I do have a question of the day, if you will. I need some shelving options, because that broke and gave me a heart attack when it fell on my collection of Y the Last Man and whatnot. So, yeah, if you guys have any shelving suggestions, I could use one or two. But the bigger thing I wanted to get to was kind of a culmination of stuff that I was ingesting today. First bit being from news that I heard from technically beyond the trailer, but Grace, who does all the YouTube videos associated with Bleeding Cool, Think About the Ink. She had this interesting bit where she was talking about the fact that the reason Vertigo has really kind of stopped doing what Vertigo did, and I know right now we're seeing some new minis and all that, but the reason why Vertigo, especially after these minis are done, will effectively be dead because they won't be able to generate anything new. I can't imagine, or if they do, Vertigo will be a whole new thing, which we've been hearing for a while. The reason that all that's happening is because when Marvel was bought by Disney, DC suddenly saw Warner Brothers come in a big way to copycat the move, even though they should have been the ones to pioneer all that, because they already own DC, so that's weird. But the idea being an exec was coming in and trying to get familiar with the DC brand, as weird as that sounds, and they're saying, what's popular, what works, what's here, what's not, They're obviously probably talked about, Superman, Batman versus, say, Aquaman, which I'm getting into, by the way. What the executive heard is, and we have these really popular comics that we published that were done years ago, but they're still really popular, like Preacher, Sandman, all that. And they're like, oh, well, why don't we do a movie with that? They said, oh, well, we can't because the creators own all these rights and it'd be a whole thing to do that. And so the movie directors or movie producer side people are like, well, that's dumb, change the contract. And thus, effectively, the death of Vertigo, at least as we knew it, which is sad. And I was taking in with this with basically plowing through an entire channel's backlog of this video game bit called Super Bunny Hop. And I love video games too, and I try to watch some video game stuff as well, and I try to get away from IG and all that and hear more, what people who have a bit more to say about it, to say, and this guy is great. He's the best guy I've seen talking about video games. He does amazing critical analysis. He talks about it from a bit of an industry standpoint, but also taking the games on their own merit. And when you're talking video games, you have to, in a way, separate narration from other stuff, but also see how that interplays. And so it's a very different thing than just talking about a comic, but certain things kind of intersected, especially when he's talking about the business side, and especially the business side versus the final product. And that's where I kind of wanted to tangent off and maybe talk about some stuff coming at it from a slightly different light, viewing it more like comparison to how video game fans do things, which is kind of natural. I imagine most of us are or understand that side of nerdom, if you will, as well. So the biggest thing that hit me, and something that I think we all deal with and kind of avoid, is hype. And that's interesting, because when you think about hype, I mean, yeah, we want to get excited, we're all into this and all that, but we're all into a character, and like month to month, I mean, you're excited about a character and that'll keep you on, but if a run isn't going well or stuff, you have to stop. But you have to kind of balance, as a comic reader, you know, like sometimes there's a few bad months, sometimes there's a few slow issues building to something cool, sometimes, I mean, and then like events, and whether or not it's just another shitty event, and are you going to buy into all the hype and then probably deal with a disappointing ending, or maybe it'll pay off, maybe you're into that, but the hype there is very different from video games, where like we're talking about singular products, and so they build up all this excitement and then you buy it more sight unseen than comics, I'd argue, and you're in for however long of an experience. And a lot of the sales, especially with something like GTA 5 that just came out, you know, breaking sales barriers, though how the profit margin versus, you know, cost of that works, I don't exactly know, but it made a lot of money. It was a very hyped thing. The thing was, whereas I know a lot of people playing that think it's a great game and all that, I'm not trying to argue that. And there's a bit of brand recognition. That's a big thing that they're pushing. That's a big thing with comics. I mean, it's kind of like that's, you know, the big event thing. And so there's some brand behind it, there's some expectations, there's a lot of that, but there's all this gloss and like an advertising team, and that's what's really pushing the sales. Because most of the sales, especially with the way the comics industry works, more so than video games, but what they're trying to do is that with video games, a lot of the sales, and especially for console games, a majority of the sales are pre-orders. You have to sight unseen based on basically advertising and some weird buzz, but no real proof. No one's actually played that game yet. You're putting down your money, or you're putting down a small bit of money to say on the day you're just gonna plop down and get the game. And for all you know, that's shite, and that's become more of a point of contention within that world. But I mean, in comic world, where we're talking about mostly mainstream comics, these comics, by whoever you buy them from, basically has to order them months in advance. And if you're dealing with online subscription places, you're very beholden to that as well, because they're essentially forcing you to do that. You have to order months in advance before, you know, and then something comes out. But what's interesting is where with video games, you can pre-order pretty much up to like a day or two before the product comes out. With comics, you have to be ordering, 3 months in advance for it to go through the whole preview cycle and all that and deal with Diamond. Which is doubly insane, because the industry really pushes and advertises their comics, I'd say about two, at most, usually, like, unless it's like a big event, they're building up hype forever, but I mean, like, especially for the smaller stuff that needs the hype, like a new Image #1, it's like 2 weeks advance when they start really pushing the advertising and pushing on the internet sites and giving you the previews and other books and whatnot. And in a way that doesn't make any sense, because suddenly you could be really excited for something, but may have the inability to get it even if you want to buy it, which is cockeyed, right? It doesn't make sense. Like, the advertising doesn't play to actual sales. Like, you may actually just be pushing up a want for something. You may be increasing the demand through cost without being able to get a supply readily to them while that demand lasts. Mostly I feel it's probably balanced out, but there's definitely been times where, like, especially because, you know, a lot of hype for a comic is still, like, within a week after. Like, if there's any tested stuff, like, if I wanted to go pick up GTA 5, I could a week, a month, whatever later. Probably. There's rare times where that doesn't work with games, but that's rare. With comics, if you're talking about new number ones or certain things that sell it, you need to get it before it sells out. And so there's times where, and then that can work because then people will wait for a variant or a reprint or whatever, but you can lose sales there, and there's a lot of people who don't want to buy those variants or reprints because comics are very big about making sure if something is reprinted that you can tell the printings apart, which leads to variant covers and all that, and I understand that, and there's people who will buy all that, but I actually think in a way it might hurt them. So that was one thing that I thought was interesting, and if any of you have any take on the whole hype thing and whatnot, I'd love to hear it, because I feel like it's good that people... I feel like hype works better for comics too, because you're talking about getting them excited to invest in a portion of a story, and then they move on. I feel it's effective. Like, you need to be able to build a certain amount of excitement to get them to hook into your story at all. With games, that leads to much more misleading things. But I just feel like it can work better for comics, but we need to have a... As much as I don't care, I mean, I don't want to care as much as the business side, like, I want to be able to be like, oh, shit, like, I heard some stuff about sex criminals and today, and I was like, oh, man, I want to go catch up on that. My comic store has tons of printings of issue 2, but none of issue 1. I'm not going to buy it now. I'm going to wait for the trade, but I'm not going to be that active. I'm probably never going to get it now. And I'll live, but... I mean, from their side, that's lost sales, and I imagine that happens a lot, and that a lot more comics would be bought, but they're kind of bad at selling it. And I'm not putting that on my shop by any means. I know it's not their fault at all. They had tons of number 2s. They probably want some extra number 1s, because they know that will sell, and having runs is smart and all that, but it's just the weird industry behind it. The next part was digital sales. And this is a little trickier to try to compare, because the idea of digital sales of video games has, in effect, been around much, much longer in various increments and ways. Whereas to comics, it's still relatively new, but we're all familiar enough with it. And it would be impossible to talk about this without trying to compare Steam to Comixology. And I think in doing so, it really shows why the idea of digitally selling mainstream comics sucks by comparison. So, on the one hand, video games, you have Steam, which has not only revolutionized the way people think about price points and the moving and the longevity and the way video games are kind of handled in a lot of respects, and kind of upended the more traditional model in a number of ways. But you have Comixology that has just played in to the mainstream, harmed itself by doing so, and is unwilling to challenge the brick and mortar traditional and all that, and prices itself to the physical model, despite the fact that you get in a lot of ways a lesser product, probably. Now, there's a lot of there's some inapt parts here. So if if we're talking about video games, playing a video game on a computer just makes sense. There's the screen, there's the buttons, it works, you can plug in a controller, it's pretty flawless as far as that. I mean, you have the device sitting here. With comics, you pretty much need to get a tablet to take advantage of that. In a lot of ways, it doesn't measure up to paper in a lot of ways. It rocks for storage, but I will say this, as far as Comixology goes, as far as organizing your digital collection, it could do a lot better. There are worse things out there, and there's... it's good, it's not great at that. And for being the premium comic book digital service, it doesn't even organize as well as certain independent digital stuff that essentially just organizes CBR files. There are better versions out there for organizing digital collections than Comixology. That's really sad. And so, right there's a divide, because Steam is pretty apt and allows you to create your own organization and whatnot. It's kind of janky, but it works. Comixology also is beholden to being in weird places, and the Marvel code, DC code thing, where you can peel the sticker and hand a code to someone, is interesting. It could be handled better. I imagine Comixology has something like this, maybe not. You can't really, say, buy a digital comic for someone very easily and give it to them. I don't think you have, Comixology friends, so there's no way to really do that very efficiently within their own ecosystem, which is where Steam gets a lot of sales. Also, there's more incentive because you want to buy games to play them with your friends. But by the same token, you might want to buy a digital copy of a comic, especially if it was on a super cheap sale and it's something you want them to read to talk about, and get that to them. Buy it for them. Be like, just read this, man. Bought it for you. Read it. I think they'd garner more sales that way. I don't think it would be I don't think it would blow them out of the water. But I think it would also foster more people to come to it, because suddenly if your friend buys you, 10 digital comics, you're in there. And once you're in there, it's easier to buy more, no matter where you're at with it. So, whatever. But, what's really rough, what it really comes down to, is the price point. With Steam, games become so ridiculously cheap that people buy them just because they think they might play them maybe one day, and a lot of people end up with comically long game lists, myself included, that there's no way they could actually ever really play all those games, especially to their fullest extent. There's just no way usually. With comics, I feel like you could get a lot of library and still want to go through, and the idea of getting an entire run of something for a chunk of change is appealing, and there's more likely that you might go through it, and ending up with a comically large amount of comics is gonna be happening anyways. But when you're charging $3.99 for the new comics and all that, I get that, and you don't want to piss off the brick and mortar. I can understand that to a point. But I think you need to realize the digital product is less. Also, I think the bigger contention for me is with older comics. At this point, when we're talking about, say, I don't know, Mark Waid's Captain America run. This is in the 90s. We're talking 30-some-odd issues. How many people are buying that for the, $2 an issue that they priced at? I bet someday they'll put it on a sale and the issues are $1 a piece. For a digital... No, I mean, 32 comics or so, put it on sale for $10 for the run, which isn't even like that outrageous when you think about it, but $10 for the run, boom, sweet, and I'm just gonna read through that. Like, you put it at a price where people will be incentivized to just buy it because they want to read it, and it's relatively cheap. And you start doing stuff like that more regularly, you're gonna be making more money because there's going to be incentive because digital comics will be cheap. And whereas I think that run is relatively easy to hunt down and get the issues for cheap, there's certain things where most of the issues are cheap, but there's like that one issue. A great example would be the old school, like, Volume 1 ongoing Birds of Prey. You can go pick up pretty much any issue of that run, probably $1 an issue or something, like, not much. And I'm talking the physical stuff here. Like, if you find it in shops dependent, they all have policies of old comics. But if you go online, you can get those comics dirt cheap for the most part. But it's issue 8, I want to say, where Barbara kisses Nightwing, and it was a big deal. And when I was looking for it, that issue was $100 online. You just bundle that in with all the other digital stuff, and you get, like, you know, again, like, I don't know, 30, 40 issues, you put it down for $10, $15. People want to read that, and then it's cheap, but you make a sale, and that's comics that nobody's really buying anymore, but it's this backlog stuff nobody's really making money on, but people kind of want to read. You put it cheap, boom, people are reading it, they're reading tons more comics, they get these huge collections. It doesn't matter to Comixology. I mean, I know there's download server cost, that's the very nature of their business. That is the literal cost of doing business, and they have to deal with that, sure. But, I mean, you increase the interaction, you increase everything, and people are more excited about it, and they get more locked in, and then you get more people reading more comics, and that's the end goal that helps both people. Better business, better reading experiences. Like, you know, just get people reading more comics by making it more affordable. That should be the goal, especially with the older stuff, the archive stuff that, I mean, I don't understand. Maybe there's something with DC or Marvel, or that's the bigger point of contention, but I don't know how. But Steam is able to sell old games that aren't even really that old, like Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas. Those are 360 games, and those are huge experiences. We're talking 60 plus hours of game, like $6 on a Steam sale. Not even, like, huge game, and that's cheaper than a comic almost for a game you probably will never play all of. It's the comparison's hilarious because, I mean, growing up I love video games, but I had to be really picky about what I got because games were like, you know, $60, $50-$60. Suddenly they're like $5. I mean, or a lot of the reason I'm playing a lot more games now is frankly because, hey, I have more money and they're way cheaper. Whereas right now, comics are rising in price and I get less value out of them. And, you know, I have to store them all and everything. It's not like I don't buy a ton of comics, but it's harder to justify some of this stuff when it's like, for instance, $5 for the first issue of a relaunch of Sandman, which is I mean, yeah, it's going to be a great comic, no question. But how much is the trade going to be worth on discount? I mean, you can wait, and even then, that's going to be a chunk of change for some pages. You make that a digital file, how much does that really cost? You can get the money to the creators and everything. I don't think people realize, especially in comics, how much of the cost is the physicality of everything. And frankly, some middlemen that could be cut out to help the entire industry. And I think it's time that we look at breaking some of that. There has to be some of that out there, and it's diminishing quickly. We've already seen graphically basically come and go. That was the big competitor to Comixology. And digital comics have been around before and forever, but that's like the weird independent webcomic stuff, and there's a lot of great stuff there, but that's like a completely different realm. And if we could kind of correlate and do something with that in an event, it's been attempted, but there has to be something. There's this whole world out there, and it needs to be grasped. And that's the last big thing. If you've been paying attention to the video game world at all, the idea of the independent game is much bigger now. The idea of small teams working on smaller projects, cracking out, making these great, smaller scope but bigger heart, like more focused games, in a lot of ways are outperforming these huge AAA games. And they're able to do it partially because they're selling games cheaper. And that's part of where the price came in, where Steam grew too. But for Comixology, there's not really... There's some love for more independent stuff too, but they don't really allow it to be cheaper. There's some stuff, and I know that they sell some comics for more like $1, $2. There's like an Atomic Robo exclusive, and there's some other stuff that they tried to push, like Comixology first, but it's such a small dip, and the prices, I mean, when you're talking regular comics being like $3 and then on sale $1, and then you're selling this for like $2 or whatever, it's not really... I mean, I know percentage-wise it's fairly big, but I mean, really, it just doesn't feel that much cheaper. You're not really taking advantage of the digital, and then the collections don't really seem to do a whole lot better. Which is sad, because I actually know Dark Horse has made more of an effort of this, where they sell trades, or actually bundles of trades worth, digitally for a good chunk cheaper, but they also don't want to go too cheap because they don't want to completely invalidate their physical prices. And so maybe there really needs to be a launch of a completely digital publisher, something along those lines, and efforts have been made in that realm. Mark Waid put out a little bit, and for free, a digital comic to kind of touch on that, and tried to make some pushes, though I don't know quite how much. Brian K. Vaughan obviously is doing some stuff with his Private Eye series, and that's made something of a splash, but I remember it being big right when it came out, and I know another issue's come out, and I haven't really heard anything about that. I think it was the novelty of it, and I'm sure it's probably a great comic, but I haven't really heard anyone else talk about that. And maybe there needs to be something. Maybe there needs to be a changing of the guard, and this is probably a really good time, especially considering where the comic book press rests right now. Bleeding Cool, I think, has been making more and more static with kind of the hand that almost feeds it with DC and Marvel by pissing them off by announcing certain things, especially with the announcement of DC offices moving closer to Hollywood in Burbank. So, and by doing that before some of the employees found out, caused some issues. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, honestly. So Bleeding Cool might be a little more on the bleeding edge than they want it to be. You have Comics Alliance, which has come back, but since it hasn't really quite had the luster, because you can kind of feel the corporate hand of AOL on it a bit more. iFanboy is nowhere near where it used to be, as they really step back. Word Balloon no longer being associated with them, I heard about them far less, and that might have kind of cycled through, especially since you don't get an influx of creators as much, and John of Word Balloons pretty much talked to everybody multiple times. Not to say that there's not still good stuff there, but it may not have the appeal it once did, especially given that they're about as long as I'm making this video. That's okay, I only get 10 views anyways, right? And maybe there's time for some press that's willing to focus on maybe some more web exclusive stuff, really try to push a changing of a guard, because I feel like there has to be this like untapped group of comic fans that are loving stuff more that's like, you know, Saga, maybe some of the old Vertigo stuff, and then like Atomic Robo and Chew, and you know, all this great comic stuff that maybe isn't so tied to past and all the superheroes of Yesterworld, and maybe kind of having a changing of the guard of what's the most popular kind of comic, because the idea, superheroes have been so tightly bound to the idea of comics. I don't think that's ever going to go away at all. But I would really love to see the day when it's at least pulled back to being like the majority thing, but it's only like a third of the major comics, and there's a range of other stuff. And it's been getting closer lately, but it's nowhere near that, nowhere at all. And it would be, it's really nice to see some cool stuff coming up, and it's growing, but it's kind of slow unless, again, you start looking more towards that web realm. And so here's hoping. And again, love the superhero stuff, but I think with the way that, since Marvel and DC has not only dominated that, but essentially bought up and then killed off any real competition of it, it's kind of hit a stagnation point, and I think we're going to start seeing some falling stuff soon, especially with DC moving. If the Hollywood hands really start getting their claws into more comics and stuff, I think we're going to see more and more characters that don't have some either possibility or already have a movie out or multimedia out of some sort fade away. I actually would be surprised if that starts happening more and more, if Aquaman's even really used or has a book at all in the long run. Odd prediction, but maybe. And maybe it's going to take those two kind of going down a bad place for comics to kind of be respected better by having the other stuff kind of fill the void, as it were. Maybe the golden age of, you know, these universes and stuff that we all love so much is reaching a kind of end of a golden age, maybe? I don't know. We'll see. And with that, I mean, who knows? Who knows what will happen? And that's kind of steering away from the whole video game comparison thing, but I don't know. I don't think it necessarily even is, because, I mean, the whole idea of where video games were is going through a change in the guard right now, too, because all these big AAA games have reached a saturation point where they don't reach the numbers and audience they once did. It's still large, but a lot of the indie, cooler stuff that's cheaper is starting to come up, and with the two new big releases of the consoles now, a lot of people are feeling lackluster because it just looks like more of the same. And with events like Battle of the Atom going on, and I know some people are loving Infinity, but I mean, I feel like how long can they spin the same gear before more and more people kind of fall off the wagon? Like, it's just, even people who love superhero comics, there's a growing number of them that don't want to deal with events and want their own separate books, but they're not getting it, and so they kind of go elsewhere or find other things. And that's what's happening too, and we're reaching more of a diversity point. And whereas that might not be good for these big, overly bloated places that are more focused with their advertising and their revenue than their creative end, the places that are smaller and really only have their creative end to really focus on and have to do all the other stuff, but that's their focus, is the creative, are starting to come up more and more because it's starting to really show how much better it is. And that's for both, and that's for everything in media right now, and the way the world's working, with Kickstarter affecting everything, democratizing how stuff's made, with more digital platforms, with, as I said, more diversity of content, and hopefully that's coming more to comics, because otherwise, who knows. So, cheers for a long-winded way of me trying to find a thesis and getting to a thesis statement at the end, basically, to drinking. So yeah, if you guys also could think of any other comparisons between like video game industry to comic industry, I would love to hear it. Response video would be amazing. I've had like 2 of those ever. Comments are always awesome. And catch you later.